and she roughly handed Blake to him. So now I am going for a swim, and you can stay here and look after our children. Blake needs a bath, and can you listen to the rice? It should be done soon. She left the room, but immediately came back again, realizing she was still holding the dishcloth. If you don't want me to behave like a housewife, she added, don't treat me like one. She slammed the dishcloth down by the sink and was gone. Michael was left in the kitchen, feeling deflated and misunderstood, wondering what she'd meant by listening to the rice. He was too afraid to ask her before she left, and while she was gone, he forgot about the rice entirely, apart from once when he looked at it cooking in the pan for a while, even bent slightly to put his ear to it, acknowledging its wet, bubbling sound. It was only later, when he smelt burning, that he remembered. He ran to the cooker, dismayed, fearful for his future. Melissa returned, refreshed by her backstrokes, her shoots from the edge, her wheeling arms, all of which were quickly superseded when she discovered this new failure. Listening to rice, Michael learned that evening, means listening out for when the wet bubbling sound becomes a dry popping sound. And when it does, you're supposed to turn off the heat and put the lid on the pan. This allows the hot air to do its intrinsic softening in the house of the rice. These were her words. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. How are you? Good. I'm so happy to be here, Ake. My book, this third book, is about two women. A woman who is sold into slavery, kidnapped and sold into slavery, and the other who's a daughter of a chief who eventually becomes her mistress. And I'm going to give you a taste of the woman who is sold into slavery's life before she's kidnapped. Her name is Amina, and I think that's all you need to know. And there's a food theme going on. So continuing with that, Amina watched a glob of shea butter liquefy into a golden yellow oil, her mind on the caravan. She thought of the Madugu. Iya, her grandmother, once told her that he had 20 wives and was still searching. When she told her friends, they started conspiring to set themselves in his path, to be a 21st wife. What was admirable about that? Amina preferred the idea of traveling on a camel or horse with a sack full of shoes, doing the kind of work Baba did, making something with one's hands and then traveling far to sell it. The oil bubbled and spurted and cast its nuttiness into the air. Amina rested her head on her palm and stared at the oil. No woman in Botu, her village, made shoes. They all worked the land. She needed to talk to Baba. What if she made shoes? A knock hit the back of her head, giving her a slight shock. It had to be Na, who couldn't stand Amina's daydreaming, or Iya, who took pleasure in startling her. Amina turned and met Isana's cold gaze. The woman's eyes were piercingly white, her hair plaited with thread and styled cone-like above her head. Nana, your hair is inspiration for this. But you're a nice person. So. Prickly. Images of porcupines seeped into Amina's mind whenever Isana appeared. There was a woman in second place and bitter about it. She was all the proof Amina needed that being a 21st wife was not desirable. Amina looked at her stepmother, who was mother to Isa, her only brother. She arranged her face to look as respectful as possible. "You're going to burn the masa," said Isana. "There's nothing worse than burned masa." The woman was right. The shea oil was boiling in black bubbles at the edges of the pot. Amina took the pot off the fire. Isana turned on her heel and left the kitchen before Amina could thank her for her counsel. Amina returned the pot to the fire, scooped out bowls of the rice and millet paste, and lowered them into the oil, excitement building in her chest. The masa turned golden brown. One never knew what the caravans brought. Into a big brass basin, she piled a large pot of millet porridge, honey, sour cow's milk, and several calabash half-spears cupped together. She put the masa on a smaller tray, then carried her basin outside, where Na, slightly obscured by the steam rising from a large pot, churned her tuwo. Na's tuwo was popular because it was fluffy. The family's secret was to sprinkle rice flour into the millet paste. Na called her over. "Did I see that woman hit you?" Amina nodded slowly. The knock had only startled her. It wasn't that painful. And as mean as Isana was to her, she didn't want her to get into trouble. The oil was burning. "Next time, don't give her a reason to touch you," said Na. Na said that because Isana's skin was lighter than theirs, she generally got her way. Na said, a long time ago, something had poisoned people into thinking the lighter you were, the better you were. She said Isana looked uncooked, that in a perfect world, Amina would be considered more beautiful than Isana. Then Na said, "But you can't eat beauty." And I'll stop here.
So Diana, I'll begin with you. Why did you, she said this book is about taking care of children, but really it's about marriage and long-term relationships at a particular stage. Why did you choose to look at this particular stage?
Well, my initial inspiration was from books that I was reading by male American writers of the 60s and 50s, like John Updike and Richard Yates, who were writing stories about marriages and domestic life and everyday life in the context of America. And I really wanted to write that kind of novel in the context of Black Britain. And I felt that there hasn't been a lot of space in literature for Black characters to live out their everyday lives and for us to see them in their domesticity and in their sort of really deep internal psychological battles with everyday life moments. So I decided to pick that moment of the meeting of youth with age and what happens to your internal psychology at that moment. And it was also a space of, there's great humor in it, and there was space for me to bring in this sort of psychological element to it as well, in terms of Melissa, the main character, changing from her younger self to her older self. So I really wanted to explore that in the context of Black Britishness.
Thank you very much. Ayeesha, your book is about slavery. My mother, the writer Amateju, says that in Ghana, we need to go through a debrief about slavery because, one, very, very few of our literature actually deals with it, and we never talk about it. So how did you, as a typical, ordinary, let's say, Ghanaian woman, how did you get to the topic? And what inspired you? Where did you, your bravery, how did you get there? Yeah.
Thank you. I was coming up with a family tree because that's the type of person I am, and I think most writers are interested in their pasts because there's so many stories in there. So I was hounding my father, and I sat him down one day, and we started drawing the family tree, and then he starts with the slave. So he says the slave's daughter was Imashetu, Imashetu's daughter was Imalarai, and I'd say, wait, back up. What's her name? Tell me more. And he said, she could have been Fulani. She could have come from Burkina Faso, from Niger, from Mali. Nobody knows, and we just know her as the slave. So then I began to dig a little deeper. I did a lot of research, And I went up to Salaga, which is in the north of Ghana, and it was the site of an infamous slave market in the 19th century. At its height, people were going and coming. Thousands of people's lives were sold there. And I went up there to try and talk to her descendants who remained there. And still, nobody would talk about it. Every time I'd bring her name up, oh, we need to show you another site, which was all well and good. I saw the slave market, which is now a lorry station. I saw what is essentially a mass grave, the earth, and then there are these pepper plants beneath it. And beneath that, there are the bones of people who had been sold and who hadn't made the journey, who hadn't survived that journey. But every time I tried to broach the subject of this woman, of our ancestor, they would change it. So I didn't get far. But in terms of bravery, I think I live outside Ghana, so I just get my work done in my little hole in Senegal, and I write, and when I come back, I get into discussions with people.
Us, when you talk to Ghanaians, they'll be like, no. A lot of us have either, we all do have ancestors, ancestresses who are slaves, especially the Akans. I mean, the Ashantis, we are short people. One of the ways we got height was to get slaves from the north, and we are recalcitrant. I mean, we just don't even want to consider it. Do you think that we will ever change, that narratives like that are going to get us to confront it a lot more?
I think with a certain generation forgets about it, but I think if we write more books, if there are movies like in the style of Black Panther to educate and to broach these subjects, we will talk about it down the line.
So we are going to approach it from another narrative, not our own histories.
Well, do our histories, but make it. My goal as a writer is to make history sexy, even with the bad, even with the horrible, but make it accessible as well, and not make it dry. Because I took history and I dropped it when I was in school. I actually didn't finish history as a subject, but I love it, and it's because I think it's just told so dryly. So in reclaiming our stories and telling them in ways that are accessible to people, I think we will begin to have these discussions. And I've had discussions with even people from the generation that I just put down, my mom's generation and above, and some of them have openly said to me, yes, we knew that these people were descended from slaves, and we even gave them land, so the discussions are starting. But I was just in Ghana for the Pidja Festival where you were, and there was a woman doing her research, and she said, I was trying to find out why people don't want to talk about it, and I thought it was shame, but she said people just don't care. They feel like it was in the past, so it's done, and we don't need to discuss it anymore.
Except when people are up for chieftaincy positions.
And land, yes.
And then they say, oh, no, that line came from slaves. No. You can't have it. Thank you. Diana, your book has a playlist.
Yes.
I'm fascinated by that. There's actually a playlist. So talk about music and actually pop culture also. And how you use it in the book.
If you go onto my website, there's a link to the playlist for the book, and also in the acknowledgements page, there's a link to the Spotify playlist, and it's basically the songs that feature in scenes throughout the novel. And I was kind of using music throughout to help illustrate the characters' movements and their lives and their psychologies. And because I was writing kind of a portrait of Black Britishness, music was a really important presence there as well. Music is very intrinsic in my own life, and I listened to a lot of music while I was writing this book as well. I always think of musicians as people who are very alive, the most alive people among us who are people who are involved with music and with dance. So I really wanted to incorporate it into the novel to kind of bring my characters to life. And I tend to use references to pop culture in my novels just naturally, I think, because I think it just makes I think it just gives another dimension to the writing, and I tell layered stories. So any way that I can enrich the story it all goes into the novel almost like a melting pot of different elements, and it was just really good fun, and I was really happy that my publishers actually took it on board as a playlist and made this playlist as a way of marketing the book. So yeah,
I'm always fascinated by secondary and tertiary characters and what writers do to throw away characters. And your main character is Melissa. She's married to Michael. And then we have a second couple, Stephanie and Damien. And we get a good sense of Michael, of course, and Damien. But Stephanie seems to get lost somewhere, you know. It seems like she's almost one-dimensional. Did you just get tired? Oh.
I actually really like, people have mixed feelings about Stephanie. Yeah. Some people really like her. But other people do find her sort of one-dimensional. I don't really take her anywhere. I think actually Stephanie is white, and lots of people don't realize that. And that was kind of intentional to make that ambiguous. But I think the reason why I like her is because she's very uncontested within herself, and she's the only character of the four main characters who has a lack of kind of existential crisis, you know. So she's a mother, and she always wanted to be a mother, and she's not kind of fazed by the impositions of feminism for women to live their lives in certain ways and to live their lives in non-traditional ways. She wants a traditional sort of mothering role, and she fully embraces that and has no problem with it. And maybe that's why she comes across as one-dimensional, but I felt that she was important to include because I think women should be able to live their lives in whatever ways they want, alongside feminism. So yeah, she's like that for a reason.
I want us to stay with characters. So it felt to me like you are a writer who keeps very tight control over your characters and what they're going to do. Is that something you're conscious of? Do you set out to do that? Or is just something that happens in your writing?
Well, I don't think of it as controlling them. I mean, I don't fully believe in this idea of characters, you know, having lives of their own and kind of speaking you know, outside of you, the writer, and kind of speaking to you in the middle of the night. And I don't really believe in that description of characters, but I do think there is a chord between the writer and the character, and they are sort of puppets in a way. But I think my job as the author is to give them as much space as possible to just be themselves and make them kind of fully manifested in the writing. And then they don't sort of behave on their own, but they do naturally lead you towards certain destinations. So I don't think I control them, but there is a thread between me and them.
Thank you. Ayeesha. Warche, the princess, she eventually, I'm not giving anything away when I tell you this. She eventually is the mistress of Amina. And I was in an elevator with someone, and I can't remember who said they had just read the book. You did, yes. Chitra did. And we talked about sexuality. And whether... what we were wondering was, what is it about now that more African writers are willing to explore a wider spectrum of sexuality? So can you talk a bit about that in your work?
I guess the space feels safer. When I started writing, I don't think I'd have felt bold enough to write a character who has a complex sexuality, a fluid one. But it feels like a safe time, like the discussion we had yesterday, the fear of queer. I was amazed having this discussion in Lagos, in Nigeria, which the world perceives as one of the most homophobic places, and yet we had this rich discussion, or I listened in on what was a really rich discussion, and it feels like a safe time to do that. But other people have been writing. Aikwe Ama's The Resolutionaries has a lesbian character, and this was written in, I think, the late 90s or maybe early 2000s. So it has been done. It's just that we are, I feel, I can't generalize for everyone, but I feel safer, and I feel like I can have these discussions even with someone like my mother, who read the book with an aunt who's in her 70s, and we're having discussions about women's sexuality, and these are discussions that in the past no way would I have had with my mother, but it just feels like we can be more honest now, and I don't know why that is, but it feels like, yeah, the time is.
I always do a little bit of research about how the wider world beyond myself is receiving the books I'm reading. And in one of the commentaries, someone said, Warche is, she's feminine. That's where the feminist narrative comes through. She's strong and independent, and she understands politics as a princess. She has ambition, but she also accepts her role as a wife. And I thought, well, African women have always done that. So, because I think even when Yasantua gets up in Ejiso and she is ultimately she leads the Ashanti warriors to war against the British, she starts by saying, "Are there no men here?" Yeah. So if there were men, she wouldn't get up, because we are matrilineal. The men rule on our behalf. Is this? I want you to talk a little bit about that, because there seems to be. It's almost as though African women, or we are viewed as we're either strong, independent, or we are wives. Mothers. Yeah, yes.
It's true that we're viewed as monolithic people, and we're not. We're wives, we're teachers, we're professors, we're complex. And with Wuche, I wanted to explore that. Granted, she got married because she thought she was being strategic. I think in an ideal world, she would have liked to remain the princess who chooses her lover and who can move into whatever space she wants, but ultimately she accepts the role of wife and mother. Wife less so, I think. Mother more willingly, because, like you said, that's question and to play their role of mother and wife, but that doesn't stop them from questioning, and that's what I look at.
One I'll ask, and then I'll ask questions. Diana, Melissa, she's funny. She frightens me a bit because she is. I don't think it's about fright, but I think it's nice for me. I've had such problems being a mother. It takes up too much of my time. I resent the attention I have to give out, because I'm also an only child, so, it's just exhausting. And Melissa expresses that, it's like, this thing is lovely, but it's wrecking me. Yeah. And I think that honesty is so wonderful, and it's so needed. Can you talk a little bit about, is that your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I too have had issues with motherhood. It is draining, and it is exhausting, and I really wanted to express that and to be very honest about that. It was also a very frightening thing to do, because I think even now it's motherhood is not necessarily seen as a kind of a valid subject in literature, because I think literature is still very male-dominated in terms of themes. But at the same time, motherhood is is something that we're all connected to and something that we all experience through having mothers. But there just hasn't been enough focus on how it actually feels, and the kind of the splitting of identity that can occur in a woman's psyche. So there's lots of moments in the book where Melissa is in sort of these really frustrating situations to do with motherhood, such as kind of play groups and baby groups, and these interactions that she has with Michael along the way. And it also is the cause of her kind of nervous breakdown that happens towards the end of the book, which isn't autobiographical. I did a lot of research around nervous breakdown and this idea of the split self and how it's to do with an inability to connect the new self that is trying to emerge. And that felt very true to the experience of motherhood and what can happen to a woman. So I felt that was really important to dissect and really examine and take on as a weighty kind of theme, literary theme.
It's interesting to me that, and now that you say it, I can see it completely how someone like Richard Yates could have inspired you. Yeah. Because I think books like Revolutionary Road are incredibly, they're very specific place and time kind of books, in a way in which you pick it up, you know exactly where you are, you know what the issues are, and you achieve that in your book, except that, but you also frame the entire book by two events, Obama's inauguration, which happens in America, and Michael Jackson's death, which is a global event. Both are actually global events. Why did you do that? Why in particular? Is it, because it felt interesting in such a locally specific place for you to have done that. Why? What were you trying to tell us?
Well, the book is about portrait of a couple, portrait of London at a particular point in time. And I was also influenced by reading Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, in which, because I was reading a bit about his thinking behind that book and how he wanted to create a portrait of the Russian aristocracy, and he used the moment where Napoleon invades Russia in 1812 as a sort of opening to the window of that world. So I was trying to do a similar thing with Obama, and Obama, his victory, his first election victory, was such a huge moment. And while it was happening, I felt that I knew I wanted to document it, and I wanted to have it described how that felt, the hope of that moment, the empowerment of that moment, but also the climax of that moment as well. So yeah, I wanted to be able to open that and read a book about what that felt like. And Michael Jackson's death as well had this kind of equal cataclysmic effect, I think, this global impact. So those two moments were a way of framing this narrative about ordinary lives. It kind of took it onto a larger scale.
Well, as a reader, I want to thank you for owning up to your inspirations, because most writers would never. They say, oh, I've read a lot of books. They don't want to ever talk about who has inspired any certain work. It's always like it dropped out of the sky, boom. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. Questions? Yes? We have one there, and we have one there.
Hi. Very interesting. Thank you. My question is for Ayeesha. I come from a part of Nigeria where we don't marry from a certain side because, which I found out much later, they were slave traders, and they used to raid our village often. Now, I wanted to find out that during your research, you mentioned that, a lot of people were, it's in the past. But did you ever have cases where, people would be like, yeah, this particular side, they're no good at all. And is there any way you wanted to incorporate that into your writing, or you just decided that, okay, since it's already, it's gone, and at least between Nigeria and Ghana, I think Ghana acknowledges the fact that, yes, there were slave traders, we were involved, and we were culpable, but this is what we did, and we're moving on from it. Did you ever feel the need to add that to your writing? And did you notice anybody that, actually wanted to go into that evil? No, we don't like these guys.
I actually didn't come across that in my research. What I found was it influenced, say, the type of architecture that people had in northern Ghana, but it didn't really play a role in marriage. Like, we don't marry these people, we don't marry those people. Because in my case, one half was from a slave raiding family, or slave raider, and then the other person had been enslaved. But I think marriage erased a lot of that, that fear of the other, because what happened in Ghana was when people were enslaved and sent into a family, sometimes they'd marry into that family or they'd be adopted as children. So it's slightly different there. It's only when you dig a little closer, a little deeper, because you want to buy land or you want to become a chief, that it would be revealed that you came from a and a person who had been enslaved's family. And then the other question, it was two layered. What was the other one?
Whether, if you saw it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, let me make sure I'm understanding the question properly.
Okay.
Her side, her village, they don't marry the other side because they were bad slaves.
Mm-hmm.
Whether the judgments, whether we made decisions about who to marry, coexist with based on whether they were slave traders.
Okay. That didn't play so much in my book, especially because, I hope I'm not giving away this, but like I said, it's my family came together because there was somebody who had raided and somebody who had been enslaved. So it was how that coming together came about. So I'm not sure I'm answering the question properly, because, yeah, it makes sense? Yeah, it was a different.
Thank you. Congratulations, Ayeesha. And thanks for sharing part of the making of the book with us. I see your work as a family and a communal project. And considering the fact that Ghanaian society is so tight-lipped when it comes to some of the issues of ancestry, I would like to know what would you say are the risks that you've taken as far as this book is concerned? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, just the fact that I'm tackling an unpopular subject is one, sort of airing a dirty laundry. People ask, why are you doing this? To what end? Slavery is in the past, so what? Why are we doing this? And then also even talking about themes like bisexuality or being gender fluid. We don't talk about things like that in Ghana either. So a risk that children won't be given this, the risk that children won't be given this book to read because some of its themes will be considered immoral, or we don't need to have this discussion. She's not adding anything new. So I think it's the risk of being excluded while my goal is to start a conversation. The risk of not having it at all, I think, is a big one that I think about. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Her and then her.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Veroline Chineye. My question is to Ayeesha. While I was reading your book and reviewing it for Wawa Books, I discovered that there is this particular motif that runs in female.
The what motif?
There's this particular motif, yes, that runs in books written by Nigerian authors, especially female authors, when this book have to, at the end, provoke change. So there's this motif of female bonding. Yes. So while I was reviewing the book, I was asking, was it something you deliberately stood out to achieve? Like Chimamanda's Purple Hibiscus, you see the effect of bonding. In Buche Mecheta, Akachezibo, you see the effect of bonding. And so the princess bonding with Amina and with her mentor, and towards the end of the novel, when she said she's going to gather other women and change. So, sorry. So I want to know, was this something you deliberately sat down to achieve, or is it something that just come because you want to have a positive end using women? Okay. Thank you.
I think, female friendships are important to me as a person and as a writer. So it was definitely a topic I wanted to explore. But in the case of Wuche and Amina, it was especially nuanced. And I write in the interview at the end of the book that it was the friendship lived in the things that weren't said. Because on the surface, they're not friends. She's a slave. She's a owner of Amina's life. How can you be friends with someone who owns you, really? But it lived there. There was a certain complicity between the two women. Like when Wuche decides to take agency and control of her life, it's Amina who is there to help her, even though Amina has no choice in the matter. But still, Amina is there as her rock. So it is a theme that I do play with in most of my writing, I think. The friendships between,
But also, there doesn't have to be an agenda.
Yeah.
African women, we wouldn't be here were it not for us bonding.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of even huge polygamous households where you would expect massive acrimony, the
like
labor that they have to do with their children, if they weren't helping each other out, we wouldn't be here. Yeah.
It's true.
Hi, I have two questions, one for Ayeesha and one for Diana. Diana, I've only read 26A, and when you were talking about ordinary people, I'm wondering, is there any chance that you might want to write domestic fiction set in Nigeria, since you have a Nigerian background? And then my second question, I don't want to give any, there's no spoilers, but did you, sorry. Was there another?
Outside too, if it's
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Was there another ending you had in mind, or did you specifically make that ending?
Good question. Okay, so would I write a domestic fiction set in Nigeria? I think I would. Well, part of 26A is set in Nigeria. There is a chapter that's set in Nigeria, and I do have ideas for stories that I want to write that's set in Nigeria, but I feel like I need to spend more time here, though. And being here back in Lagos is making me feel like coming back for longer and spending more time, because I do feel really sort of grounded and at home here. And there's this whole, because I'm half Nigerian and half English, but I'm living in my everyday life. I'm living half of me in the UK, so it feels like there's this other half that needs to live. So hopefully in the future, yes, definitely, and there will be some kind of sequel to 26A as well.
So on the ending, I'm not saying the ending because it's kind of obvious even before you read the book, granted, given that I'm here today. So even though I knew what the ending would be, my characters actually do take lives of their own. They went on their own paths and then eventually led to that ending. And because it's actually based on fact. The Salaga War was a real war that happened in Ghana. So the framing of the novel is based on fact, and I didn't change those things. So things that happen, people who lose their lives, that's all based in reality. And I wanted to keep those as fixed as possible, and then let the characters weave between those fixed, points. Yeah.
Thank you for your panel. I was going to ask Diana a question about the end, but Kinna will soon kick me out of the room.
You are very general,
But
quite insightful in the generality. I will allow the question.
Okay, so at the end, you left it open-ended between a particular couple. And I was wondering what the future of that particular couple might be. Are you happy?
So what the future of that couple might be? I wanted to leave it open because through the novel I was wondering whether that should be the end for that couple and whether one of them should split up or not, and I wasn't sure right up until the end. And it felt very true. It felt true to life and relationships in general, that relationships are often so kind of endangered by everyday things and challenged by everyday things. Even though there's sort of deep love and a soul connection between two people, so much can get in the way. So I wanted there to be this possibility of togetherness in the future. So it's intentional.
Hi, everyone. This was awesome. I wanted to ask you both about how you thought of or handled race in your book, in your books. Ayeesha, particularly, I was thrilled by the fact that it wasn't this sort of formulaic, like the white boogeyman came in, but race was very interestingly sort of woven through the story. And I'm interested in your decision, Diana. You mentioned that you wanted to be sort of leave it ambiguous, and just sort of what was the thinking behind that?
So I feel like the narrative out there is that, the white people came in, colonized us. Before that, there was slavery. But in examining internal slavery, I wanted us to really examine our role, the role we played in selling our own people off. And so I didn't want to move the conversation away from that. I think that was the beginning. I wanted it to stay within our questioning of why we did this. And so if I shifted the conversation too much towards the white people's interactions with the people of Salaga, I feel like the conversation would have shifted. So in the relationship between Wuche the princess and one of the German officers, I didn't want to hammer over the head difference and what is it that I'm thinking of? I wanted the focus to remain on us. I wanted this to be a book about Africa and Africans and not a book about colonialism. This book exists before that. And I wanted to also explore the relationship between people, regardless of their skin color. And when Wuche meets Helmut, she's able to see him as a man. So that's what I wanted to look at, and didn't want to shift the conversation too much to a narrative that has been handled already, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I see this book it's a book about race, but it's not about race at the same time. It's not about race, it's about people. It's about black people. And I've often found that race is, especially the way that black writers are published in the UK, there's this imposition to write about race, and as if race is our subject and it belongs to us. And I kind of wanted to open that out. So it is about race in the sense that the race is kind of inherent in our everyday lives, and it's something that we're always negotiating. And but I wanted to kind of turn the volume down on it, but at the same time to observe how race and how the history of slavery and colonialism, those legacies, how that impacts on our everyday lives. So So I use the word blackness quite a lot in the book, and that's, but in other contexts, but I'm always aware that I'm using the word blackness, and I'm almost throwing that word back out into the general vocabulary, and but acknowledging at the same time that it does lay so heavily on our existence. So yeah, I wanted to turn the volume down while embracing the theme at the same time.
Thank you, Diana. Lawless Army has informed me that time's up. One more question, please. Panache?
Yes, the South African student.
Hi, I'm Ayeesha. I just wanted to find out what the response or engagement with the book has been in America. What the response or engagement with the book has been in America, specifically just looking at how with Black Panther maybe is one example of seeing that tension between Africans on the continent and Africans in the historic diaspora, that deep pain and hurt at, the betrayal. And I wonder where this book is filling into that conversation, if at all.
I'm going to find that out soon because the book is going to be released in America next year. So I'm really interested in that conversation. So thank you for bringing it up, and we'll talk about it. Yeah.
But also, can I interject as I always am doing? But I think that when the real significance of books like Ayeesha's that focuses on our own internal slavery is that their pain is also mirrored in a different way in pain in sections of our families. And I think that the more we talk about it, because I always say it happened to all of us in different ways. I have, in my extended family, it is played out in one part of the family, and it is so painful that I have come to meet the legacy of it, and so it never goes away. So I just think that hopefully we all write more, and there is less of an angst, but maybe more of an understanding that this happened to all of us, yeah. So I want to thank you. Go buy the book, oh. We didn't sit out here just so that you know we are talking. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
A big thank you to Kinna, Likimani, Ayeesha, Haruna, Atta, and Diana Evans. Their books are available in the signing area, so please go there and purchase the books. Can we let